disaster. Mark, there is no way.
It shows, for one, that the government can't sell it.
Today, boat people fast. Our Navy now a taxi service. A Labor MP on how the government got its border laws so wrong. The big carbon tax sell. How much more can we take? Go Whyalla Wipeout there on my TV. And the surprise winner of Spin of the Week. I'm Andrew Bolt, and this is the Bolt Report. What a farce. On Wednesday, the Australian Maritime Safety Authority received a distress call from asylum seekers in a boat just 51 nautical miles from Indonesia's coast. They were barely 1/5 of the way to Christmas Island, but rang Australia for a lift, not Indonesia. We had the first of two naval vessels there about 4 hours later, and of course, the boat was in no trouble at all.
The vessel appears to be upright and in a stable condition.
The 162 people on board refused a request to turn back to Indonesia, and our Navy eventually gave up and gave them a lift the rest of the way to Christmas Island. Now, it's not the first time people smugglers have sent a fake distress call, and the opposition is right.
What's happening in terms of asylum seekers using the Navy as an NRMA in order to come into Australia is just another symptom of the government's complete failure to protect our borders.
So, why didn't the Navy just return these boat people to the nearest port, in Indonesia? The Home Affairs Minister wouldn't give a straight answer.
Going to see it taken back to Indonesia or port here?
No decision has been made on that at the moment, and that decision will be made by the captain of HMAS Wollongong. It's not the sort of decision that should be made by politicians.
No, absolutely wrong. Where to send boat people is exactly a decision for politicians. In 2001, Prime Minister John Howard ordered the Tampa to take its rescued boat people to Nauru. But Labor has since shut Nauru and insulted Indonesia too often to send people back there either. And it doesn't want to admit Tony Abbott is right.
Under a coalition government, there will always be the option of turning boats around where it is safe to do so.
And in fact, this was the very kind of boat that probably should have been turned back. That's why the government and the Greens were so desperate to rubbish Abbott's policy.
Turning the boats back is a highly dangerous plan, which risks the lives of asylum seekers and Australia's Defence Force personnel.
Deterrence of that kind doesn't work. The Pacific solution of John Howard didn't work.
More nonsense. What is more dangerous? Is it telling asylum seekers, no worries, jump on a boat, our Navy will pick you up before you sink, or not? Or is it to show boat people that if we do catch them at sea, we may just send their boat right back, as the Howard government did 7 times? Why is there even a debate about this? Under the Howard government's Pacific solution, we got just 3 boats a year. In 2008, Labor scrapped Howard's laws. The result, record numbers of boat people and some 800 deaths at sea. How did the government come to make such a terrible mistake, and what can we learn from it? Joining me is Labor MP Michael Danby. Michael, in 2008, you were the chairman of a parliamentary committee that backed Labor's weakening of the border laws. You said there were just 34 people in detention, and Christmas Island, the detention centre there, was, quote, a white elephant. How did your committee get it so wrong?
Well, we didn't focus enough on offshore processing. Remember, the Liberals voted with us in 2008 to close up Nauru. We were focused mainly on the tough conditions that people have been kept under in places like Woomera. But this isn't about the past or about me, Andrew. This is about trying to get a solution for, as you've put it, for the people that are drowning at sea now. Those of us who are really humanitarians have to sort of face up to that issue.
But, and yet, when you wrote your report, there were just 34 people in detention. That's it. Now there are 6,500 people in detention. Did no one warn you at the time that weakening the laws would actually lure in more boats?
Well, weakening the laws, we were actually putting in place a regime for treating people justly in these detention centres. It was a policy looking backwards to what had happened under the Howard government in places like Woomera.
But it was all about justice, I know, but since then we've got 800 people who have drowned. I mean, where's the justice in that?
Well, precisely. So therefore we should do what we tried to do last week in Parliament and come up with solutions that allow offshore processing, because it's not humanitarian to let people drown at sea. And the people who blocked this, Andrew, let's remember it, in the Senate were the Greens and the Liberals.
Yeah, look, I'm happy to get onto the Greens, and we will. But listen,
don't let Tony Abbott off. I mean, you don't believe...
No, he says... No, I won't, because I'm going to go into that, because he says Nauru, and you say Malaysian people swap. But I want to go back to your 2008 committee, because immigration officials, including Andrew Metcalfe, gave evidence to your committee, which was looking into all this. Metcalfe is now the Immigration Department Secretary, telling you Nauru won't work. He's persuaded the government. Reopening Nauru won't stop the boats. But did he tell your committee 4 years ago that closing Nauru and weakening the boat laws wouldn't lure more boats? Was he wrong then?
No, and he's not wrong now. And I don't think the experts are wrong now, and I don't think Nauru is a perfect solution now.
No, but were you told by him or anyone else in your committee hearings, listen, weaken the laws, close the Pacific Solution, you'll get more boats? Did anyone tell you that?
That didn't seem to be the issue at the time. It was the...
But did anyone tell you that? That's what I'm trying to find out.
As I remember, no, they didn't tell us that at the time.
Don't you think this is nuts? I mean, people like me, wicked conservatives, were warning you, weaken the laws, you get more boats. How come this didn't penetrate in people's minds?
In 2008, it didn't seem to be the issue. There were not that many people coming. The question is, what do we do about it now? If you were to put yourself, Andrew, into the shoes of some of these people who are coming, you'd imagine 2 years in Nauru, spent in that detention centre, and then coming to Australia. And remember, that's what happened in the past with all of these people. Under the Howard government, would be much preferable to going to the back of a queue in Malaysia of 100,000 refugees.
It's just that I'm wondering what faith we can put in the kind of people telling us things won't work when 4 years ago they didn't even think about, according to your account, they didn't even think of the consequences of what they were arguing at the time.
Well, I'm not going to be critical of Mr Metcalfe. As far as I'm concerned, he came up with...
But he never warned you.
He came up with programs, including during the Howard government, that seemed to work. Nauru would cost $300 million to build. Sending people to Malaysia is much less expensive. We've got a humanitarian program in place for the people that would be sent back there under the agreement that Chris Bowen had negotiated with the Malaysian government. And I think a mixture of those two things would be regional handling of these people, offshore processing, and fair treatment of them here if they do get to come to Australia.
Does that include sending to Malaysia unaccompanied children?
I wouldn't favour sending unaccompanied children, and I know your answer to that will be they'll send them all on boats. But I think you just have to play it on an individual case-by-case basis.
But then you are going to get boatloads of unaccompanied minors if you're not going to send them back.
I think both Malaysia, Nauru, and a regional processing program, that all of the Australian public work on together.
Of unaccompanied minors.
You know, the overwhelming evidence so far is that there are men from Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq coming. If you were to send them to the back of the queue in Malaysia, they'd be treated fairly, but it wouldn't cost the Australian taxpayer a huge amount.
No, I'm with you on that. It's just that the concept is then we'd be sending either children back. If we don't send children back, you're going to get more boatloads of them.
Do you really believe Tony Abbott will be that cruel that he'll drag these boats back to Indonesia, Andrew? I think that
can be done. And this last boat should have been done, Michael. I really do think that. But look,
with children on board? When you can't be concerned about it being sent back to Malaysia.
It was in sight of the Indonesian coast, yes. My answer is yes. But look, thank you so much for joining me, Michael.
No problems.
Coming up, is Labor's campaign to sell the carbon tax effective or an insult? The panel is next.
past, and there's nothing new in that.
So if they're actually rejigging the very parameters of the tax in 3 years' time, that's a sign of panic.
Sensible people agreed some years ago, including Liberal leaders, that a floating price, a market-based price was the best solution, but the Greens threw that deal away back when Kevin Rudd was Prime Minister, and thanks to the Greens we have an overly complicated price that's too high. To your point, why are we doing it? Because poor countries still need electricity, and I don't think that we should expect poor... Electricity is literacy, electricity is jobs, electricity is freedom. We shouldn't ask poor people around the world to sacrifice their prosperity for the sake of ecological...
We shouldn't ask America to cut its, have a carbon tax itself.
I think America should be playing a part, but I don't think that the developing world should need to be playing a part when they still need to feed themselves.
What about poor countries like Canada? We should be asking them to step up.
Yes, of course they should step
but they're
up.
Not.
But we lead the way in many ways.
I don't think we should be leading the way on this one.
And of course we shouldn't, because you see, Canada is like Australia. It's a mining country. But who are the wood ducks out there in the global world that have got these taxes? The EU. How well are they going? There's no mining in Leeds and Manchester, or in England, or France, or Germany. There's hardly any mining at all. It's the mining countries like Australia and Canada that are putting themselves at a big disadvantage if they have these taxes. That's why the Canadians have said, forget it.
Well, Labor has tried another line this week. I mean, it's like they're trying to throw the kitchen sink anything that's trying to work. Tony Abbott won't really change this tax. That's the latest attack. Don't worry, it's here to stay. He won't change it. Do you believe it?
I believe he will change it, but I believe what Tony Abbott's promising is industry policy. And the way I see it, industry policy gave us the Australian car manufacturing disaster. Industry policy has given us the steel industry debacle. You can't let public servants manage industry from Canberra. And my biggest concern with the direct action is that everything the Liberal Party sensibly criticised about solar feed-in tariffs and all the nonsense that happened at state government level can only be worse from Canberra under a great big direct action policy.
Michael, this is exactly the right point. Tony Abbott is still sticking by the same targets as the Labor Party, just going to throw money at it in different ways. I mean, shouldn't the Liberals just bite the bullet and say, listen, this is useless, this is good money thrown after bad, it won't change the climate, let's scrap it.
Well, it's not going to change the climate. That's the policy the Liberal Party is going with at the minute. But you see, I think the whole world is in retreat on this. The whole world is moving away from these renewable targets. Gently, you can start to feel it. And why? Because the cost of these renewables, 2, 3, 4, 5 times the cost of electricity. Now, no one can afford to pay that.
The Liberals actually go ahead and say, look, we're not going to spend these billions, we don't have them to waste anyway, it'll be useless. Cassandra's absolutely right.
Well, you ask Tony next time he's on. But
you're a former power broker, you tell him.
The bottom line is this, the world is now starting to retreat from these targets. You'll see it slowly and inexorably over the next couple of years because no one can afford to pay 4 or 5 times the cost of electricity for renewables.
And the Liberals should too.
Well, that's a matter for them.
Come on, here's your chance, please. Anyway, look, the Greens. The Greens seem to be in bad odour now with the Labor Party, finally. The Labor Party finally, they've realised that they're not only eating Labor's heart, but its brains. You've got Sam Dastyari, the Secretary of Labor in New South Wales, saying Labor should consider putting the Greens last on how to vote. And in Victoria, that's in the by-election for the seat of Melbourne, the Labor Party has put the Greens below even family first. Good move?
Well, the truth is that Labor and Liberal are more like each other and should remain more like each other than either are like the Greens. You know, we had a consensus for decades in this country that made us strong and successful and prosperous, where we had essentially a free market-based approach to prosperity and a safety net, which both sides largely agree on through institutions like Medicare. The Greens have come in and made an extreme left-wing agenda mainstream, not just within the media, but within the Labor Party. And initially, I thought, well, this is great. All the extreme left-wingers in the Labor Party will leave and join the Greens. And some of them did, and they helped professionalise the Greens, which wasn't very good for us. But the worst thing that's happened is that the Labor Party then began to fight to get back the people who left, when we should have just said, you know what, we should let those inner city seats go. Those people are rich, privileged, they're completely out of touch with the needs of ordinary families. We should not be fighting for seats like Balmain anymore.
Is this right? Should they just say to Anthony Albanese, bad luck, Tony, you know, Grainler must go, Melbourne must go, we are not going to sell our souls?
I think Cassandra's absolutely right. You've got to abandon those seats. Those inner-city wealthy lefties, basically, you know, people on secure government jobs reading the Fairfax Press who are secure in their housing, they have low mortgages. You know, these are the people Labor have to ditch. Dastyari is half right. He says the motion next weekend is we won't automatically commit to give preferences to Green. No, he should take the Paul Howes view, which is the right view, which is no, we should put the Greens last, as we put One Nation last. And Labor are absolutely right in this by-election here in Victoria. They put family first before the Greens, and so they should. And let's hope that at the next federal election, Tony Abbott's view is that we should get rid of Adam Bant in Melbourne by the Victorian Liberals putting, the Greens last. Let's hope he does that, and let's hope Bant loses.
I think that's absolutely right. The Liberals have to do this too. I think the Greens represent a cultural movement that is a danger to Australian prosperity, and let alone to our rationality. But why has Labor played footsies with the Greens so very long? Is it that they've lost their sense of moral purpose, that they think, well, the Greens will subcontract our conscience to the Greens?
Nobody feels excited telling their friends at a party that they support a political movement that's about modest, centrist policies. People, you know, the energy that lies on the fringes of policy is very motivating.
People should stop going to those types of parties.
I don't get invited to them anymore.
Stay at home, for God's sake.
But the thing is, the Greens are fundamentally an immoral movement, not a moral movement. There's something immoral. You take the boat people policy. Something immoral about insisting on policies that lead to 800 people drowning at sea. That's not a moral policy. That is immoral.
Yeah, and there's immoral in supporting a policy that puts Aboriginal meat workers at risk in favour of cows in Indonesia. You know, but the unholy alliance between the Labor left and the Greens, and particularly the union movement and the Greens, where Greens like Lee Rhiannon have become very outspoken in support of the union movement and tried to capture what's left of the industrial heartland of Labor, and that's made it really difficult for Labor to end the relationship because it's dragged the debate over there.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, earlier this week you had Clive Palmer, the Queensland billionaire miner, proving again that he is an embarrassment to the Liberal Party. He should not be in the Liberal Party, I think, at all. Certainly not in politics. Have a look at his latest farcical interview on Lateline, where he didn't even commit to backing Liberal policies if he was elected. Have a look.
Well, of course, the Liberal Party policy is where you can vote with your conscience at any time. I've been a member of the Liberal National Parties a lot longer than Tony Abbott has. He knows that. I'm sure he'll take my advice on certain things. I'm a heavyweight, as you know, Tony, and Tony Abbott's only a lightweight.
Who are the clowns in the Liberal National Party in Queensland backing this guy?
I don't know the ins and outs. Look, he's obviously a very successful businessman, but yeah, well, Tony's clearly not his butler, as he was alleged to have been Gina's. But look, I think business people and politics don't necessarily mix. For most people in politics, it's about nuance and subtleties, and unless you understand the nuances and subtleties of language in politics, it's very hard to succeed. And most business people come in, trudge all over the place, and don't quite get the language right. And that's why you see very few people make the successful transition from business to politics.
Yes, the difference in command and control. We've got 10 seconds. What do you think is helpful for later?
After 10 years in organised politics, what makes me saddest is all of the people who've taken the passion and the joy and the fun and the anger out of it and become carbon cut-out banking tellers. I'd love to see more people with that kind of energy.
Yeah, but I'd like to see more
politics.
people with brains and discipline.
Yeah.
But Michael Kroger, Cassandra Wilkinson, thank you so much for joining us.
We need more Craig Emersons.
Coming up, Labor warns the media not to play politics. So why does it get journalists to do its dirty work? The heads of 7 big media outlets this week told the Gillard government to back off plans to crack down on the media. Labor MPs are particularly angry with the media after learning last week a News Limited journalist interviewed James Ashby before Ashby lodged his sexual harassment case against his boss, Speaker Peter Slipper. And he sent Ashby this text: "We will get him." Another media conspiracy against Labor, says the government.
People in the media need to recognise whether they're reporters or they're participants.
But some Labor ministers actually don't mind reporters being participants if they follow Labor's script. On February 24, Treasurer Wayne Swan's staff wanted to undermine Kevin Rudd as he challenged Julia Gillard. One sent text to journalists suggesting they ask Rudd cracker questions at his press conference, like, had he leaked against Gillard in the 2010 campaign? Would he rule out challenging her a second time if he lost? So, here's how Rudd's press conference went.
Did you leak or in any way sabotage the 2010 election?
If you challenge on Monday and lose and go to the backbench, will you remain a happy little Vegemite there and not challenge again?
Coincidence, I'm sure. Hypocrites. Malcolm Turnbull this week revealed a surprising talent for stand-up comedy. He put out a video mocking a community information kit to promote the government's national broadband network. This $36 billion NBN already seems over budget and behind time, with just 4,000 people signed up so far, which Turnbull thinks explains what's in this kit.
Actually, quite a lot of pens in here. You can give away pens to people who haven't got the NBN so they can keep writing letters to each other and put them in the post. What else have we got here? Oh, yes. We've got some USB sticks. Now, these are very good if you don't have the NBN and aren't likely to have it anytime soon, because you can download files onto this and then put them in your pocket and bicycle them to your next address.
Malcolm Turnbull, surprise winner of our Spin of the Week. And that's the show. Thanks for joining us. Stay with us. Meet the Press is next with Paul Bongiorno and a Green. I'm Andrew Bolt. Goodbye.